My name is Elvin Lopez. I'm one of the trainers here at Universal Remote Control, and today's class is on Sonos integration. If you guys have any questions during today's class, just please drop your questions into the questions dialog box. JR, who is another member of the training team, will answer those questions in a timely manner. And for any questions that we can't immediately answer, we will answer towards the end of the class. Today's class is being recorded, so we can always refer to it on our YouTube channel. Additionally, this class is covering Sonos integration for the purposes of URC. This is not a class necessarily on how to use a Sonos device or set up a Sonos device. It's a class designed to teach you how to take a Sonos subsystem that has already been programmed and integrated into Total Control, as well as how to use our two-way module. Jared, if you want to just take one quick second and make sure that your audio is working, that would be great.
Yeah, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Thanks for taking the time. And if any questions come up, type them in the question dialog box. I'll get you an answer as soon as possible. More than likely, we're going to wait till the end to answer questions. That way everybody can benefit from the answers.
Thank you so much, JR. So today's agenda, this is all the different things we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about the Sonos certification, what the Sonos module is, what are the supported features, the unsupported features, automation options that are available. We'll discuss the differences between core and interface architecture, as this is what this new module is using. If you're unfamiliar with those terms, don't worry, towards the end of the class you will be familiar with what both of those do. Then we'll talk about how to download the module, how to add the module, how to assign a default player, how to use the module. We'll go over some basics in terms of getting Sonos set up with DMS, talk about some best practices, and then towards the end of the class, we'll see how to do this in real time in the Accelerator software. Last year in October, Sonos launched a program for certification for integration partners, URC being one of those integration partners. Now, this is an integration program across all of our competitors, so it's not just URC that had to follow this certification process. Control 4, Crestron, all the other competitors, all the other types of home automation systems that are out there all had to follow this same certification program. Now, URC received its certification in 2018, which is this year, and we released our new module, which allows for simple and reliable control of Sonos. Now, keep in mind that this module was only designed for Total Control 2.0. Keep in mind that all new features, modules, and future upgrades to Total Control will be made exclusively for 2.0. That is the future of Total Control, and that is where we're going to be moving on going forward. This does not mean that support has completely ended for Total Control 1.0. All the current products in 1.0 will be supported, and there will always be firmware upgrades made to the Total Control 1.0 platform. However, I just want to make it clear that Total Control 2.0 is the company's push forward moving into the future. So what is the Sonos module? Well, it provides you with two-way control of your Sonos devices. It is Sonos certified, so it does carry the Works with Sonos badge, and it supports volume control, grouping, access to favorites, and some advanced automation options. Now, we'll go into full details on each one of those categories in just a second. The main new feature, or I guess one of the biggest things that is brand new with the Sonos module, is the fact that it's using core and interface type modules. And we'll discuss that in further detail as we go along today as well. Let's start off with some supported functions. Playback metadata. You're going to get your album artwork, your album name, your artist name, and pretty much all the feedback that you would have expected to see from a Sonos subsystem. So you can see the image at the right, we can see the album artwork, we can see the song title, the album, the artist, and pretty much all the metadata information that we would have seen if we were looking at this through the Sonos app. We've got playback control, so your play, pause, skip, all of those transport buttons or those play buttons are available through the Sonos module. Volume control is also possible from the Sonos two-way module. Now, the cool thing about how volume control works with this Sonos module is that it'll display for you every connected Sonos device or every Sonos device that has been assigned to an interface, and you'll be able to adjust the volume for all of those Sonos devices from one menu. Consolidates things and makes things a little bit smoother to work with. Now, we will also be able to view and play favorites You can set up to 40 favorites. That's what Sonos allows. So you can have your 40 favorites set up and access them from the two-way module. Essentially, that little star icon we see circled on the right-hand side, that is your favorites button. Select your favorites. It'll open up your favorites menu. Now there's a couple different favorites located on this here. Choose a favorite to begin playing and controlling that specific favorite channel. So if I was looking at a playlist from Apple Music, I could begin playing that playlist and then use the playback controls to pause, play, or skip that current playlist. You can also access stations from Pandora. Pretty much any built-in source found through Sonos, you can create a favorite for and have it located on this menu. Grouping is also supported. Now this is a Sonos feature which pretty much allows you to take two Sonos devices and make them one through software. The cool thing when you group with Total Control or group when using the Total Control two-way module is that in terms of volume control, we'll give you volume control for that group as one entity, but we'll also give you the ability of controlling volume for that group for each separate Sonos speaker or Sonos device, which is actually pretty nice. Lastly, we do have shuffle, repeat, and crossfade on supported built-in sources. So sources like Apple Music, Spotify, those are just a few examples of built-in sources on the Sonos side that would support shuffle, repeat, and crossfade. Each service will have different supported options, but this is what the URC Total Control 2.0 module will allow for control with and through Sonos, shuffle, repeat, and crossfade, as well as all the other features that we have mentioned on this screen. Now, as for some unsupported features, the new Sonos two-way module does not support music browsing. Music browsing is performed through the Sonos app or the Sonos desktop application. Now, the good thing about this is that through URC Mobile, we do have the ability to add what's called an in-app launcher. Now, the in-app launcher is located in your shortcuts menu, which your shortcuts menu is at the left of the main button. Select that, and towards the bottom of the screen, you'll see 4+ icons that will allow you to nest third-party applications. So what you want to do is use that in-app launcher to nest that Sonos app, and this will allow for seamless integration. Essentially, you can open up your Sonos app, or just open up your URC two-way module, select a favorite, you're listening to your favorite, you no longer want to listen to that favorite, but you want to look for something discreetly, or you want to look for a specific song or a specific artist. Hit your shortcuts button, select your Sonos app from that shortcuts button. It'll make the iOS or Android device jump into the Sonos app. You can choose whatever song, whatever station you want to listen to. Hit the back button and return back to the URC Mobile 2.0 app to continue controlling the Sonos subsystem through the Sonos two-way module. So this is a recommendation that I would make for pretty much every Total Control system using Sonos. If you've got URC Mobile in the system, make sure that you nest that Sonos app within that in-app launcher. It'll make life a lot easier. In terms of automation, as we know, Total Control is an automation and control system. There are certain events that we can automate off of. What I mean by automating off of it means that our Total Control system can communicate out to the Sonos subsystem and react based on a couple of different events. And these are the events that are supported. We have on play, which will trigger an event when a Sonos device begins playing. On pause or stop, which triggers a macro based on a device stopping or pausing. On volume change, which will trigger macros based on a device's volume change. It can be changed based on a set level, so in other words, a set volume limit, or based on raising or lowering the volume to a different limit or to a different number. This is all done through the parameters section in this window here, which is called the Edit Automated Settings window. And all of these parameters can be changed and adjusted based on the programmer, based on how they see fit. We can also trigger macros based on mute. So if a Sonos device has been muted, we can choose to have an event trigger off of it. Maybe you're having a party, and in this party, you want to make sure that anytime the Sonos player has been muted, it unmutes. You can go ahead and do that and give people a little spin. Now, this is actually one of my favorite features here, where we can actually automate based on what's now playing. And this kind of sounds exactly as it sounds here. So you can trigger a macro based on what is currently playing. Now, what's cool is that we can choose based on what song is playing, what artist is playing, or what album is playing. So that's a pretty nice little feature to have. And lastly, we can also automate based on the line in, which will essentially trigger a macro when the device source changes to line in. Now here's just some general information in terms of core and interface modules. And core and interface modules are going to be, you're going to see these again. The HEOS module that's going to be released at some point this year will also be using core and interface type modules. So this will not be the first time you see this in URC's lifetime. So with that said, we need to know a couple key principles. First, core modules were created to reduce memory and to decrease programming time. Core modules do not use a lot of memory on your processor. So whether it's an MRX 8 or an MRX 10, core modules allow us to do more with less. Less memory usage means your processor is going to work a lot faster. It's going to launch your modules a lot quicker. And who doesn't want to decrease their programming time? Next, the core module is what actually contains all of that third-party system data that actually runs the module. Without the core module, you have no module. In most systems, one core module is all you're going to need. How this relates to Sonos is if your customers or your project is using one shared Sonos account, then all you need is one core module. The concept behind this is if you have two separate Sonos accounts, then you would add two separate core modules, and essentially each account gets a core module. That's really the best way to look at that. Core modules are never displayed on any URC user interface, and the core module serves as the brains of the operation behind the actual module. Now, the interface module completely relies on the core module. As a matter of fact, once you're adding an interface, you need to assign it to a core. Interface modules should be added to every room or area that needs access to the module, and these interface modules must be assigned to a default player for Sonos. In terms of Sonos purposes, these interface modules, once you've downloaded, they must be assigned to a default player. That way, anytime you launch the module, you have a player to be directed to. Now, here are just some basic steps for downloading the module and getting the module added into your system. First thing you want to do is download the module from the URC dealer portal. All of our Total Control 2.0 modules will be located here. Next, you want to import the module, and this is just a screen capture from the Total Control Accelerator 2.0 software. Hit the File tab at the top left, click on Import TCM Files. Once you locate your Sonos two-way module, just click OK and hit Import on this screen here. After you've successfully imported the two-way module, all you want to do is restart the Accelerator 2.0 software. You don't need to restart the Sonos app. You don't need to restart your computer, just the Accelerator 2.0 software. Now that the module's been added into Total Control 2.0 and we want to start programming this, we're going to go into step 4, which is add other devices. Now, all two-way modules that you import will be located in the My database. So if we look at the image to the right, we can see that we're not pointing our software into the URC database, we're pointing it towards My database, or in your case, your database, which is still going to be labeled My. Now, this module is located in the IP database and in the category of audio. First thing you want to do is add the core module. Now, what we can see here on the right-hand side is that we're adding this to a room that's called core. Now, this is a new best practice. So what we recommend whenever you're dealing with core modules is you create a room, label this room core, and then just hide this room. When you hide the room, it will never display on any user interface. And the reason we recommend adding the core into that room is just that when you go into step 11 or you go into step 12 to do certain macro programming or to enter certain parameters, it makes finding that core module a lot easier. Going forward, when we release other two-way modules that function as cores, this will also speed up the process of entering in those parameters, as you'll always know where your core modules will be located. They'll always be located in this room designated as core. So we're going to add that core module into that core room. After adding the core module, I'm ready to add the interface module. Now, the interface module that I'm adding here, I'm only adding into the living room. This system was programmed with the example of only having one Sonos player in the living room, but we'll talk more about differences when you have additional Sonos players when we get into the software. So what you want to do is add this interface module to every room or area that needs access to this two-way module. One of the best rules of thumbs to kind of realize this or to kind of follow this is to add an interface to a room if it physically contains a Sonos device. So if my living room does have a Sonos device, I would want to add that interface module into that room. Otherwise, I want to add that interface module to every room that needs access to that Sonos device. Once you click Add Modules, once you add the interface, the Module Properties windows will display. And you can see from the image at the right that what we need to do here is provide a name, which is just a label, and then we need to choose which module it's going to be associated to. Since currently the only type of core module we have is Sonos Core, this automatically populates. Now, I will tell you that this name section is also pretty important. Now, it's not important in the sense that the software needs it. I find it more important for the programmer themselves. So if the Sonos device that's set up in my living room, if in the Sonos app I called it living room, or I called it living room Sonos, what I like to do is I like to match the names in Accelerator. That way when I'm assigning a player, it makes it just a little bit easier. It also just makes it a little bit easier to understand in the software. So if I'm adding a living room Sonos, I would label it living room Sonos, and then click OK to add it into the project tree. Once we're done with step 4, once we've added our core module and once we've added all instances of our interface module, we want to go into step 6, which is network setup. All we want to do here is enter in a dummy IP address in the non-URC device subsection for our Sonos core. So if you look at the image to the right, you can see that the dummy IP address that's used is 0.0.0.1. Keep in mind that any device that needs a dummy IP address should always be assigned a unique dummy IP address. Now, this is just for functionality through the software. The software does not like to see empty spaces in these columns here. So same thing, if it sees something that's similar to something else, it can cause an error in the software. So it's just best to avoid all of that and just follow these steps to make sure that your system is always running and it's reliable. So if I had another device here that used a different core, so let's say down the line in this year when HEOS is released, and we have a system that's using a HEOS core and a Sonos core, I would want to make sure that both of those core modules have a unique dummy IP address. If I'm already using .1 for the Sonos core, I'll use a .2 for the HEOS core, just to kind of give you an example of what I would be doing there. Once we're done in step 6, we'll jump into step 10, and we're going to accelerate. After we accelerate in step 10, we're going to go into step 11. Now, step 11 is very, very important. This is actually an area where we've been getting several calls in through tech support, and we just want to make sure that we can clarify things to make the experience a little bit smoother. So the first thing you need to know is that you're only going to enter the MAC address for the core module. You're only going to enter the MAC address for the core module. Now, if you're following our best practices, then you'll know that your core module is located in your core room. So look at the image at the right. You can see that the selected room says core. The selected device is Sonos core. And once you select Sonos core, the selected module will automatically populate with Sonos V2 main functions. Now, if you're not using a core room, which is totally fine, it's not required. You don't need to use a core room to add this core module. What you just want to make sure is that when you're in this step, when you're in step 11, you have the room selected where the core module is located. And under step 2, where it says select device, you want to make sure that Sonos core is selected and not Sonos interface. The only one that's requiring a MAC address is the Sonos core. Once you have Sonos core selected, you want to enter the MAC address in the system parameter information box, which is towards the bottom right. Now, you may be wondering, well, what MAC address am I going to enter? I have multiple Sonos devices. So here's what we tell you, or this is what we recommend. Use the MAC address of whatever Sonos device is connected via Ethernet. Here's another best practice. We recommend always at least having one Sonos device connected to Ethernet if you can. However, we do understand that Sonos does boast about having a completely wireless system, so Wi-Fi is kind of their thing, which, no problem. We can still work with that. Now, if we're using Wi-Fi only, you can enter the MAC address of any Sonos player. It doesn't matter which one you use. The reason we recommend using an Ethernet connection is just for the stability of being connected via Ethernet. If you're not using Ethernet, then it does not matter which Sonos device you decide to use. Just make sure that you're only entering one MAC address. Do not enter in multiples, and do not erase any field that's in that MAC address section. We have had calls where someone has removed where it says MAC equals. If you don't know where that is, when we jump into the software, I'll show you what not to remove. You should never remove anything that URC places into the system parameters information boxes. But if you do get the inkling to do so, just try not to. The format that you want to enter in your MAC address is actually, as you can see on the left, you want to enter it in based on the octets. So enter in your octets followed by a colon, followed by the next octet until the full MAC address has been entered. It's also very important to make sure that you add no additional spaces in step 11, whether that's an additional space at the beginning of your MAC address or an additional space at the end. You don't want to include any additional spaces. If you're unfamiliar with where to locate the MAC address for your Sonos player, you can always find it on the bottom side of your Sonos device. So as we see on the image to the right, that's the underside of a Sonos Play 1, and we can see that the MAC address has been highlighted in that orange box. After we've added the system parameter information, we'll go into step 12, and we're just going to accelerate, and after we've accelerated, we can just download to the system. So far we've knocked out quite a big chunk of today's class. So what we're going to be talking about next is the default player assignment, how to use the module, and how to set up DMS with Sonos. After downloading, the first thing you're going to want to do is locate the Sonos module, wherever that may be. Accelerator could have placed it into a music folder. You could have placed the module onto a different submenu. Wherever you have placed it, locate the Sonos module. Once you've located it, open up the Sonos module. Now, when you open up the Sonos module, this is the first screen you're going to see. It's going to say player unavailable. The default player assigned to this room could not be found. Please assign a default player active in your Sonos household. Now, we haven't even assigned a default player, so this is just telling us that, hey, you got to assign a default player. So we're going to click OK to make this window go away. Once that window goes away, the select default player window will appear, and on this list, all network connected Sonos devices will display. Whether they're connected on Wi-Fi or hardline Ethernet, all of the Sonos players will display. In this example at the right, only one Sonos player existed in the system, which was the living room Sonos player. Now, that label there that says living room, that is actually derived from Sonos. When we set up our players in Sonos, we have to choose a name for our player. The name that was chosen for this player was living room. So that's why I have it all lined up to be in the living room, and I even labeled the button in Total Control Living Room Sonos. So it's just for consistency, but of course you can technically call this whatever you want, but I always like to make things consistent to make things easier for myself and easier for the end user. Once you choose your Sonos player, just hit the little check circle on the bottom, and that confirms your selection. Now you can click on close and get started using the Sonos module. However, there are two options here, and there's a little bit of text here that we may want to read. So this is just the instruction screen. It just says select the favorites menu to play back songs from this player. So that little star icon is your favorites button. If you want to open up additional options, the three little dots that are located on the top right-hand side will show you additional options. Now, there are more options when you have multiple Sonos players because you can group those Sonos players. When you only have one, you won't see grouping available on there, so just kind of keep that in mind. But I believe you wouldn't expect to see grouping if you only had one Sonos player anyway. Now, the other option that we have here, which is actually on this ready to listen window, is do not show. So if you just hit close, anytime you open up the Sonos module, you'll see the ready to listen instruction screen. If you don't want this instruction screen to display anymore, just click on do not show and it will not reappear. So once you've gotten here, whether you hit close or do not show, whatever the case may be, you're pretty much ready to start using the Sonos module. Actually, you are ready to start using the Sonos module. What you want to do is click on that favorites button. And once you click on that favorites button, it will display all of your favorites. Now, at the time of creating this presentation here, there was only one favorites on here, which is just a playlist on my Apple Music account. So I would just select that, and it will start playing that playlist. Once it's playing the playlist, I can use the skip back, skip forward, pause, play, and if my built-in service supports shuffle or any other shuffle, crossfade, or any of the other feature or repeat features that we saw earlier, I can have those play with this built-in source. Now, when it comes to DMS and Sonos, you can connect a Sonos device to a streamable input on a DMS device. This adds Sonos to that DMS input, which adds it to the stream, and it provides DMS zones or areas with access to that module. Since it's a part of the stream, any DMS device that has access to the stream can access that Sonos device. Now, the cool thing about connecting Sonos through DMS as well is that it will create a Sonos button for every DMS room in your system, or DMS zone. Zone and rooms, areas, they all mean the same thing. Everybody just has a different terminology for what they want to use, so we try to hit them all. So how do you do this? Well, what you want to do first is go into step 8, and you want to choose your DMS device. So we can see the example at the right is choosing the DMS 1200 that's in the living room. And all we want to do is add that interface module into the input. Now you'll notice that on the image to the right, it does not say Sonos interface. Instead, it says living room Sonos, because that is the label that I provided to that interface. So keep in mind that your Sonos interface will adopt the name that it was given on the project tree. And all we want to do is drag that device into an input on the DMS 1200 or DMS 100, whatever DMS device you're using, you just want to place it into a streamable input. Then, of course, you'll follow along through the rest of DMS programming, change your input settings if necessary, create your zone assignments, adjust your zone settings if needed. And when you accelerate in step 10 and you accelerate in step 12, macros will automatically be generated for you, menus will automatically be generated for you. But in those menus that are generated for you, Living Room Sonos will be an option that will be available in the DMS music folder for every room using DMS. So you add the input into step 8, and then when you accelerate, the Accelerator 2.0 software will create a button for this interface in every DMS zone. Now here are just a couple best practices here. So again, create a room, call it core, and place all core modules into that room. Add a core module for each individual Sonos account. So if I'm using 2 Sonos accounts, I would want to add 2 core modules. And lastly, at least connect 1 Sonos device to the network via Ethernet. So what we'll do now is we're going to jump into the software and see how to program all of this in real time. So first thing we're going to do is add that recommendation that I told you guys. So I'm going to go into step 2. I'm going to go to type room names, and I'm just going to type in core. Hit enter on my keyboard, and there is my core room. Now that I have my core room here, I'm going to go into step 4, which is add other devices. I'm going to choose my core room. That way I can see here it's adding whatever I choose to add into that core room. I'm going to go into my database. I'm going to select IP database. I'm going to select audio, and I'm going to look for Sonos. Now the reason I have this here is because I've already imported the module. If you haven't imported the module, you want to go into the File tab, select Import, and then find the module wherever it's located on your desktop or on your computer. Once you've imported it, hit Import again. Once it's imported successfully, close out and reopen the Total Control 2.0 software. So brand Sonos, model, system core, and I'm going to add this to the core room. Perfect. So now I'm going to add an interface into the living room. So let's add this in here. So here is where we get to relabel this. So I'm going to relabel this to Living Room Sonos. And I'll have, you can see the core module association here. Since Sonos Core is the only type of core module that Total Control is using currently, this will automatically be populated for you. Click on OK. And we can see that it adds it here into the project tree. Now you'll notice that the interface will still have this bracket that says interface, and the core will still have this bracket that says core. That's so that we can differentiate between the two as system programmers. What I'm going to do here, just to add some reference here, is I'm going to add a device that also uses a dummy IP address. And I'm just doing this so that I can show you something in step 6. I mean, if you guys are using Alexa, which probably most of your systems may be using Alexa or Google Assistant, you will find yourselves in this situation where you have 1 or 2 or more different devices that require dummy IP addresses. And I just want to make sure that you guys are equipped to handle that. So what we'll do is go into step 6. We'll go into non-URC device, and we're going to assign our dummy IP addresses. And remember, we want to make sure that these are unique for each one. So if I use .1 for the Sonos core, for Alexa, I will use the .2. Keep in mind, me adding Alexa to this project is in no way, shape, or form a requirement for integrating with Sonos. I did this simply so that you can see what you'll look at when you want to enter in a unique dummy IP address for devices that require it. Next, I'll go into step 10. I'm going to accelerate here. Now I can see that in my music submenu, which is, I can view it right here. So here's my music button on my main menu. Here's my music submenu. And I can see that right here is my living room Sonos. Now let's say I want to reorder this. I can easily just rearrange things as I see fit, but that's just an accelerator feature. I'll click on apply here, and there we go. So now when I open up my music submenu, I'll see living room Sonos as my first option. I'll go into step 12. I'll accelerate here. And what I just kind of want to show you are a couple different things here. So first thing, let's say you wanted to add a command from Sonos into any of your macros. Maybe you want to build a custom macro that has some functionality with Sonos. What you would do is, I'm just going to click on something here for reference. You would hit this little button here, which is between the variable and the add relay, which is called add TCL command. And this essentially allows us to add two-way commands for that Sonos interface. Now, the available commands are play, stop, skip, shuffle, repeat, crossfade, load favorite, set volume, set relative volume, mute, create group, add group, and remove from group. Those are all one-way commands that we can send out from our two-way module. Now, query commands, we have get playback state, get shuffle state, get repeat state, get crossfade state, get mute state, get volume level, get now playing track, get now playing artist, get now playing album, get now playing service, get up next track, get up next track artist, get up next track album, and get up next service. Now there's quite a few different query commands. Just keep in mind, when you are using query commands, you will need to know how to use integer variables. So it is a bit of a more advanced technique, but I just kind of want you to at least know where everything is available here. If you're just sending these one-way commands, it's usually just following whatever the parameter boxes are here. So if I want to set to a specific volume, I can choose the player that I want to send this to, and then enter in the specific level that I want it to be set to. As for those automation options that we saw in our PowerPoint presentation, we would go into edit automation macros to view those. I'm just going to add a macro here just so we can have an example, just to see where we would add all of this. We would choose the Sonos interface that we want to trigger, and then from here we can choose any of those options that we had. So whether we want something to occur when on play, or something to occur when on play paused, or on volume change, which allows us to choose a group, a player. We can set if the volume's been changed to a specific level, above a specific level, or below a specific level. So those are all the different parameters we can adjust here. We can have it trigger on mute, whether the mute was toggled, whether the mute was put on or the mute was put off, and we can choose either a group or a specific player. We can also do on now playing, and this is based on track, artist, album, or service. And this will trigger when the device's now playing item matches the entered text, and the text is not case sensitive, which is really nice. And then lastly, on the line in, which will allow our macro to trigger when the Sonos device's source changes to line in. Now, these are more advanced macro techniques, so it's not going to be something that's covered in a basic integration course, but it can be something that you'll see in a future webinar or in live training for Total Control, where we can discuss more of these automation options. Now, the last portion of the class that we're going to discuss is what to do with DMS. Now, we talked about this in the PowerPoint presentation, but I want you to see how easy it is also to do in the software, which, by the way, technically, right here, right now, the point that we are in, we can just download to the system and start assigning our default player and using the Sonos module. There is no additional required steps other than what I've just showed you. So what did we do? Just a quick recap before we go into DMS. I went into step 2, added my core room. Went into step 4, added my core module to my core room, and added my interface module to the living room, which is where my Sonos device is in. If I wasn't using DMS and I wanted every room in my system to have access to that Sonos device, even if I only have one Sonos player, I could technically add this interface to every room that I wanted to have access to, and then just make sure that on each one of those interfaces when I download, I just assign that one player as the default room. So after I added my core and interface in step 4, I went into step 6. I assigned a unique dummy IP address. I accelerated in step 10. Then, well, this is actually a step that I didn't go into, which is step 11, which is third-party two-way settings. So it's a good thing I did this recap. In third-party two-way settings, I want to look for my core. So I'm going to choose my core room. The only device I have in there is Sonos Core, so that's the only one that shows up. No confusion there. But make sure that this is always set to Sonos Core. This should also always be set to Sonos V2 main functions, but this will auto-populate. This is what you want to take a look at. System parameter information. So what I was talking about earlier, never delete this. Just don't do it. And then what you want to do here is just enter in that MAC address. I think I'm missing one octet. There we go. And just enter no additional spaces. Just enter it literally as you see there. Of course, you're not going to enter in XX. I don't actually have a Sonos player here in the room that I'm doing this webinar from, so I'm not entering in an actual MAC address. But when you guys do this out in the field, you want to make sure that you are entering in the correct MAC address. Just remember, no extra spaces in the front like this, and no extra spaces on this end here. So just make sure that it's all evened, not spaced, just as we see here on the screen. After you do that, you accelerate in step 12. After you've accelerated in step 12, you can download and begin using the module. Well, you'll have to assign your default player and then use the module. So going with DMS, we'll go into step 8. And what we want to do here is choose our DMS device. So I already have a DMS 1200 in my living room. So I'm going to take that living room Sonos, which is, again, our interface module, and I'm just going to click and drag that into the input 2. Or any input that's available on my DMS 1200 or DMS 100, whatever your DMS device is. That's all I need to do. I can go into input settings, adjust input levels if I need to, go into my zone assignments and assign my zone. So if living room is my zone 1 here, my study is in zone 1 of the DMS 100, and let's say we're going to, the core room is fine. So now that the living room is a part of my DMS zone, and my study is a part of the DMS zone, that means that when I accelerate, a Sonos button will be created for the DMS music folders in those rooms. So if we go into the study here, and I look for that whoops, wrong one, sorry. We can see that living room Sonos is there. And then you would just accelerate in step 12, just as you would have normally adding any input into DMS. So what I want to just show you guys to kind of wrap things up here is just where you can locate additional information for Sonos. The programming side of this is actually very, very simple. The portion that can take some getting used to is just knowing when to use a core, which, as I've told you guys, core, the best way to kind of think about it is based on how many Sonos accounts are in the household. Most households will have one Sonos account and everybody just shares it, but you will come across where there's going to be a household with 2 Sonos accounts. If you come across that, that means you need to add 2 core modules. So on the dealer portal, though, we can locate the Sonos module and the Sonos integration guide by going to the home page, scrolling down to Total Control 2.0 Dealer Resources, scrolling down to two-way modules, and in this zip folder, which is located on this link, you will have access to all of the Total Control 2.0 modules, including the Sonos module. Now, for the integration guide, you can look down here, click on Sonos, and the integration guide will be displayed. Highly suggest reading the integration guide before going into any of this. It's just a best practice. You should always read the integration guide before doing any type of integration. Additionally, under Training and Training Home, we can go into the self-paced section here, make sure Total Control is selected, type in Sonos, hit search, and I would suggest taking the Total Control 2.0 Sonos integration e-learning. This e-learning is a great course to take immediately after this webinar, as it's going to reinforce a lot of the information that we covered today. And that's one of the things that I would highly recommend doing after taking this webinar here today. terms of all the information that I have, that is everything that I've got for you guys. So what I'm going to do here is just kind of look into the questions dialog box and see what we've got here. JR, is there anything here that we need to address together?
Nope. No, we're good.
Looks like you've answered everything, which is great. What I will tell all of the attendees is if you guys have more questions, please drop your questions into the questions dialog box.
Another question just came up, if you want to grab that.
Yep. When not using DMS zones and using a Sonos amp or a Play 5 with audio input in a TV, how would you control the volume of the Sonos in that zone? If you're using a Sonos, so if you're not using DMS, you're just using Sonos and you're using an amplifier with a Play 5 with an audio input into TV zone. Jared, do you have any information on that one? That's got
To my knowledge, we cannot switch to an audio input.
Right, that was on my knowledge as well. So Michael, we'll reach out back to you. We can get that question down just to get you a more direct answer, as I'm not too sure how to answer that one. Chad, so when you have two cores, the MAC address is how it tells the difference, correct? Yes. So if you have two core modules, essentially whatever Sonos device is going to be using that account will go into that core, and then the other Sonos device that will be using the second account will go to the second core. And yeah, that's how it tells the difference. Essentially, whatever you're logged into whatever Sonos account is logged into that MAC address is the account that will show up on the display. If you guys have more questions, drop your questions into the dialog box. If you guys don't have any additional questions, you guys can log off, and hope you guys have a great weekend and a great rest of your Friday. If you have questions outside of the class, you can always email training@universalremote.com. That'll submit your questions to JR, myself, and the entire training staff, and we'll all work together to get you an answer for your question. Thank you, Tim. Always nice to see you on the webinar.